welcome to IAB Pulse, our regular video news show where we discuss the hottest and most important topics in the digital advertising industry today. I'm your host, Angelina, IAB's VP of Measurement, Addressability, and Data Center. Today, we will be discussing reactions to Google's recent third-party cookie announcement, addressability and model data, privacy by design solutions, and vendor diligence. Joining me today to discuss these topics is Michael Lamb, the Chief Commercial Officer at RTB House.
Thank you, Angelina. Pleasure to be here with you today.
Nice to have you. Welcome to the virtual stage, and let's chat. Let's start with the news regarding Google's decision not to unilaterally block third-party cookies. And what I guess the statement was that they're not deprecating third-party cookies, but they're going to offer users choice. We recently did a study, which you can find on IAB.com, around what happened and the reactions of the industry. We found that nearly 2/3 of the industry was surprised by Google's recent announcement. 40% of them expressed frustration. 2/3 see this as good for the industry, as well as for their own businesses, particularly brands and agencies, about 70% of them. And then more than half believe that Google will eventually deprecate third-party cookies. And lastly, more than half expect this to impact their overall business strategies, particularly ad tech companies, about 63% of them. Any surprise there, Michael?
No, I think we're pretty consistent with those findings. We were surprised. We didn't have some advance notice or anything, but we really were not shocked. And I guess I mean to say, we know Google needs to move forward with this, and the results from the testing period were going to make it very hard for them to move forward under the existing regimen with the CMA. And so, it makes sense that they needed to make a change to create some space to operate. From our point of view, it's actually not a huge change in practice. We think it's a good thing to give more control to the users. As a practical matter for us, we expect we end up someplace very similar to what we had expected, with perhaps a little bit more delay built in.
Was there relief from the team, or did you also say, you know what, this is cool, we can kind of pause and relax? Or are you moving forward with still trying to work through some of the different APIs and solutions?
Look, we've been very heavily invested alongside Google on the privacy sandbox in particular, having decided that if this was going to happen, we needed to get in there early to shape it. And we feel really good about that choice. We've been able to influence the design of that system really substantially. It's changed a ton from the beginning. And now it's gotten pretty close to something that, works quite nicely for our business. But we saw the same thing everybody saw in the tests over the summer, which is there simply was not enough adoption, frankly, on either side of the market. But from our point of view, mostly on the supply side, there was not enough adoption to offer a smooth transition if they made a hard cutoff of cookies. So, we share some of the frustration. This has been a long saga for us as well, but, we appreciate, the sort of judgment that says the industry adoption wasn't ready to support a hard switchover.
Yeah, I think if given more time, and it looks like we do have some more time to continue to hone in on some of the capabilities and really walk through and work through all the different use cases. There might be a time and a place where perhaps cookies will go away. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, our sense is this is a change maybe in method, of maybe a little change in timeline, but it is not a change in direction.
Yeah.
Maybe as a matter of Google, but maybe more largely as a matter of the progression of privacy laws and consumer expectations. We don't think the status quo is an option for very long. We don't want to speculate exactly what month are they going to turn the dial. I think we've learned not to put too much faith in those pronouncements or plan on too much certainty, but we're highly confident in the direction of travel. And I should say, as a business, we're prepared when this does happen. We're prepared for it to happen quite quickly. Somebody at Google said to me, "Hey, we release a new version of Chrome every month. We know how to make a modal asking consumers about something. If that was all that was involved, we could move very quickly on this." So, as they sort of successfully navigate the regulatory morass here, it's quite plausible that at some point, we get back to a timeline that looks fairly aggressive. So as a business, that's the scenario we're preparing for.
Yeah, and I think that especially marketers and publishers do need to rethink both their measurement approach and their addressability approaches around both known and unknown audiences. And a lot of companies are really doubling down on first party data, which we at IAB completely, that's kind of table stakes.
Yes.
But as privacy regulations and loss of continued deprecation of signals and potential loss of cookies, we do think that focusing on more of the unknown is where the market needs to kind of really lean towards now. Which brings us to the current state of affairs. What we know now upon the heels of this recent announcement, and what is your overall view into this ecosystem with potentially less addressability in front of us?
Yeah, good question. And I think it remains to be seen, by the way, if there's less addressability. We're actually, reasonably confident in the overall level of addressability. But what's clear is we're going from a world where we had sort of a single broadly adopted technical approach to do addressability to a world where you're going to have to rely on more than one, more than two different techniques to be able to, recognize and use the tactics you use today. So cookies, they're not staying where they are, but maybe they're not going away entirely. We can talk more about that. And it's actually, quite useful to us, at least, to have some persistence of that classic system. It allows us to take advantage of a lot of the systems we built. Some of that gap will be filled by the privacy sandbox. And I think they've left quite a lot of scope for alternative identifiers to fill the remainder of that gap. So, the other big change for us is, we really had been thinking of a hard cutover from one system to another system. And it's now clear that what's really going on is the shift from kind of a monolithic approach to addressability to more of a portfolio of solutions.
So let's dive into that, because I think in my experience, a lot where brands invest a lot in remarketing and targeting audience segments, lots of money being spent within social media and programmatic, and some of the things that is still unknown is how measurement and attribution is going to work, right? And addressability is so much tied into attribution and conversion data, being able to either leverage those signals to retarget users or to leverage that data for insights and create lookalike models and look for those audiences. If marketers are unable to or have limited data to tie back to performance, what's the worth of inventory out on the open web?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we all know that some of that inventory, a lot of the value derives from its demonstrated ability to drive action. And that's certainly the business we're in. So, I know there's a broader landscape of, marketing tactics out there, but our business is very performance oriented. And indeed, it's pretty direct response performance oriented. So, we're predicated on being able to use that inventory to drive an action now. We're pretty confident, by the way, that measurement closed loop will persist for quite some time. And maybe it's just the tip of the iceberg, but we've all gotten pretty good, I think, at using post-click conversions, not because we think that's the only thing that matters, but because as the easiest thing to measure, it's a good way to proxy the rest of it. And there's nothing on the table yet that would interfere with that part of the measurement loop. And so, we're confident we'll be able to go out there and buy inventory, on the basis of the actions that it's going to be able to drive. We're just going to have to use more than one, maybe even more than two different technologies to recognize confidently, who the user is on the other side of that inventory.
Yeah, and I think that's where lots of innovation is going to happen. I still question what role or how post impression or post view conversions that's going to be handled. I do think that there is a need to be able to allow advertisers to see how things are performing, not just based on a post-click, because we have branding, there's traffic driving, and there's a couple of channels and mediums that aren't conducive to
Oh, of course.
click, right? So so this brings a really exciting opportunity for innovation and potentially even competition, right?
Yeah, no, which suits us. So, this business, RTB House, is very much technology led and sort of innovation driven. And one thing this change does is it creates kind of a new domain for technical innovation and competition. I mean, maybe there was a day when, your ability to use the cookie was a differentiator. I mean, I do remember, who has the better cookie sync and all those
Yeah.
things, but that's kind of long past us. And so this has not actually been a domain for technical innovation in performance marketing for quite some time. And I think it's about to be. So, companies that do a better job, leveraging multiple signals of identity. And by the way, are able to sort out the good ones from the ones that aren't so good. In our business, it has to be quite precise to work. And so we like that because it creates kind of more scope for technical innovation. It puts a little bit more pressure on businesses to sort out the performant from the non-performant, which has traditionally been our strength.
So how do you see this emerging? What are the opportunities that you see, potentially with, there's kind of a balance, there's less data, but there's also still lots of data to be used. Do you think that we have enough sufficient data to create reliable models then?
We think there's three interesting things going on as this now comes into focus. So it's clearly not going to be the transition from one familiar system to a single new familiar system, right? It's going to be complex. It's going to be a portfolio. I'll resist the urge to say it's going to be a mess, but it's going to be complicated. So I think there's three, really interesting pieces of that from our point of view. The first is that there's going to be multiple identifiers out there, and brands, advertisers, vendors are going to have to make smart choices about which ones to implement, which ones to rely on. And that's not going to be easy because everybody's marketing material will tell you that their identifier has the most scale and the most precision, and it's totally safe. Don't worry about it. But those are actually quite challenging questions to prove and get confident in. So even just choosing which identifiers you invest in, as a technology company is non-trivial. And so we're spending a lot of time thinking about which ones really are durable. So which ones really are going to last, not through this wave of change, but through the next 2 or 3 waves of regulatory and standard change that are coming, and make sure we're investing only in solutions that are going to last 3 to 5 years. And then which ones really have the scale and precision that make them work for a performance application. It might be a good enough identifier. Okay, it's kind of like a lookalike. It wasn't exactly the right person. That's fine, but that's not fine when you're doing remarketing. This isn't horseshoes. Close is not good enough in the remarketing space. So that's one part that I think is going to be really interesting, is choosing a set of identifiers. The second interesting dynamic for us is, hey, some fraction of cookie users are going to persist. And this wasn't obvious to me, but my technical guys were very clear. Hey, from their point of view, they prefer 90-10 or 80-20 or even 70-30, whatever we end up with. They prefer that to 100-0, because having that continued pool that is in a way operating in the old structures and paradigm allows us to continue to leverage all of those systems, and maybe to leverage them now for their own right, but also use them in ways that allow us to model into the remaining population. So, we're investing a lot to make sure that we continue to get all of the information available out of those cookied user base, in whatever proportion and for as long as that persists. It's more valuable to us than just the 30, 20, 40, pick your number, percentage of the audience that'll be operating there.
I mean, I love the confidence that you have, because we were talking earlier where, when Apple released iOS and ATT, we're currently seeing 25 to 30% opt-in rate. So your team seems to be really optimistic that even with less, less data, especially first party data, that all the whatever data that you have some confidence in those models.
Yeah,
So
that's right. And maybe that gets me to the third kind of interesting dynamic here, which is there's a lot of this going on around identity and the sort of profiling that we were used to doing in the legacy world, which those often were the most predictive variables, in our sort of performance models, understanding the past behavior,
yeah.
even maybe the cross-site behavior of a given user. Those have been the biggest predictors, but there are plenty of other signals out there, which frankly, we haven't necessarily, done the best job of exploiting those yet. So as the fidelity of those identity and those profile linked signals goes down, we think there's a huge opportunity to do more with the other signals available. For example, to do more with the actual context in which you find the user. So, we're an early adopter of deep learning for our core pipelines, and we've now launched a large language model to do contextual analysis of the actual page. So we're able to parse the distinction between, we like to say, the distinction between interest. Hey, am I interested in watches or, a new dress? And intent. Hey, does this behavior actually signal that I'm in market for one or the other of those two products? That signal has been there all along, on the page, in what the user is spending time on, in what they're reacting to. We just haven't invested the energy and the technology to fully exploit it. And now, with a little bit less fidelity on the classic behavioral profile-based signals, I think we and others are going to learn to make a lot more out of some of these other signals that are available.
So you had some keywords in there: natural learning models, LLMs, NLPs, right? And programmatic has, its foundation has always been in machine learning and advanced machine learning.
Yes.
And we're moving into a world where there's, where machine learning, you can say machine learning is a subset of AI.
Yes.
And the use of AI is transforming our business pretty rapidly. How do you see it transforming the programmatic space in particular?
Yeah, well, look, I remember when ML, used to be called data science before it was ML. And what's always been fun about this category is it's always been at the forefront of the application of these technologies. But some of these companies have been around so long that really they are doing data science or sort of classic ML. One of the biggest differences for us in shifting to a true deep learning pipeline is that, we're comfortable processing a much broader array of signals with a lot less structure and with a lot less sort of grooming and confidence beforehand that the signal is going to be perfect. You're going to, because the sort of traditionally most powerful signals are being eroded a little bit, you're going to have to get much better at getting information out of the broad array, kind of the long tail. So for us, deep learning has meant two things. It's meant we're able to just throw new data points into the pipeline, and some of them stick in some scenarios and some of them don't. But we're not worried about, say, fixed column width of some pipeline that somebody wrote in SQL back in the day. The modern technologies are much more extensible and flexible than that. And we're actually quite excited about large language models and their ability to extract richer information from the interactions we have with users. Not, by the way, because we're building some unique LLM. These open foundational models that are out there, if you put the right pipeline around them, they can tell you amazing things, about old problems, about contextual targeting. We don't need, a new 2 trillion factor language model. We can use OpenAI's model, and it can teach us new things about what people are doing on the web.
It sounds really exciting. I've got 2 more questions, and we're almost out of time, so let's get through them. So we're fully in a world where marketers need to be confident that their vendors are secure in terms of privacy. Let's talk about vendor diligence. What are some of the important things that you see, especially from the with the open web, and how companies need to be solving for addressability in a privacy by design world?
Yeah, great question. And I mentioned earlier that that we're going to be in this world of a portfolio of addressability signals. Vendors are going to figure out, okay, where do I use cookies? Where do I use sandbox? Where do I use some of these alternative IDs that are out there? that's kind of exciting because it's a domain for technical innovation. It's also kind of scary because, some of those products are more or less compliant and robust than others. And if I'm a marketer and I'm working with 5 ad tech vendors, sure, maybe 5 years ago I knew they were all basically operating on cookies. In 3 years, some of them are going to be using technologies that you haven't heard of, and that you cannot be quite as confident how compliant they are. So you're right that it's a moment for some heightened attention. As a marketer, you have to ask hard questions, and you have to know who to trust. In the case of RTB House, I think we have a little bit of a head start as a European-based company here. We've been living in this kind of higher scrutiny regime in Europe for quite some time. And we made some decisions, about how to do business that I think will stand us in good stead here. So we decided really early on in the GDPR context that we would be pretty strictly a processor rather than a controller. Now, whoever really understood that distinction, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that it will stay permanently. But what that meant was we were making commitments to our clients about the things that we were not going to do with their data. And we've been aligning our systems accordingly. So, I think that's a sign that somebody has already been operating perhaps a little more conservatively with regard to how they're using data. We're also a big believer of the industry trade association sort of standards and self-reg, initiatives on this. Seems to me that like the last generation of self-reg is a little bit out of date, and we're due as part of this change, with folks like the IAB, for kind of a new crop of standards that could give marketers a little bit more confidence here.
Thank you for that. Just to highlight, we've got the IAB and IAB Tech Lab partnership with Safeguard Privacy, with the due diligence platform. There's also the multi-state privacy agreement that many of the ad tech and publishers and buyers are signing. And then I know that you're leaned into this is the Tech Lab's global privacy platform, right? So a lot of exciting stuff on the standard side. Last question before we end is, what are, now to get into specifically, what is RTB House really doing around this? So what are some of the privacy by design solutions that you are developing to help future-proof and provide transparency to your clients?
Yeah, I mean, we have, as I mentioned, 2 big bets that are really private by design and meant to be future-proof. The first is the privacy sandbox. We've invested a tremendous amount here. I think you and I just described the results. There's every reason to believe that with continued industry adoption, this can be a very high scale and inherently more private for consumers, but also, by the way, for publishers and advertisers. I don't think enough's been made yet of the protections that those systems offer to publishers, who are used to having their audiences sort of stolen and resold, in unhelpful ways. So,
did you work on the publisher side before?
I did, I'm
Okay,
afraid.
speaking like a publisher.
Yeah. Yeah. And hey, I like knowing, when someone is purchasing my inventory, that they're not then going to go purchase my audience, on a portal for a fifth of the CPM. So, we're very optimistic about that technology, but we're aware now it's going to be a lot of work on adoption. And then the second big bet we're making that's inherently private by design is contextual, or think of that in a way as publisher, sort of first party data. We're very confident that a better understanding of where your ads are running is consistent with any future definition of appropriate advertising. So we're making big investments in those 2 areas.
I think this is where content taxonomy and the audience taxonomy that the IAB Tech Lab has built is really helping out companies like you. Well, I want to thank you for being our guest, Michael Lamb. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to
This was great. Thank you, Angelina.
No problem. And thank you to our viewers and listeners for leaning in. This has been an IAB Pulse. Let's chat, and we'll see you soon on the next episode. Thank you.